Pythagorean identities are the most commonly used trigonometric identities that we are required to memorize for pre-calculus and calculus. So today I'd like to spend a little bit of time and go ahead and derive those formulas for you so you can see where they come from. Often seeing where they come from makes things a lot simpler to be able to remember them later. So we'll start off with a unit circle here, and I'm going to draw an angle up there. We'll call that angle theta. And from that, I'm going to draw a right triangle. All right, so we have our right triangle. The hypotenuse of that right triangle, since this is the unit circle, is 1. And then the x component is cosine of theta. The y component is sine of theta. So with that, we can use the Pythagorean theorem. Remember that the Pythagorean theorem states that a squared plus b squared equals c squared for a right triangle. That's where one leg squared plus the other leg squared equals the hypotenuse squared. So our first leg is cosine of theta. So that will be cosine of theta, okay, and we need to square that, plus sine of theta is the other leg. We have to square it, and it's equal to the hypotenuse squared. All right, now we'll rewrite that into the form we're used to seeing it. Typically, we'll actually put the sine first. So I'm going to write that first. I'm going to write that as sine squared theta. So sine of theta, the whole thing squared, and sine squared of theta are the same thing. This is just a different notation that we need to make sure we know. All right, this one is cosine squared theta is equal to 1 squared is simply 1. All right, so that's our first of the 3 Pythagorean identities that we have to memorize. All right, we'll use it to build the other 2. All right, so remember, it's just a right triangle. One leg squared plus the other leg squared equals the hypotenuse squared. Let's go to a clear screen here. We'll turn these off and go to a clear screen. And starting off with the main Pythagorean identity, sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1, we're going to go ahead and just do some algebra to this. Using algebra and our reciprocal identities, we'll build the new formula. Let's start off by dividing everything by cosine squared of theta. So we're just simply dividing both sides of the equation by cosine squared of theta. With just a little anticipation, you can see why you want to do that. Because sine squared over cosine squared is tangent squared. So that will give us tangent squared of theta plus cosine over cosine is 1. And 1 over cosine, remember that's our reciprocal identity. Each of the reciprocal pairs, one of them says co, so this must end up being secant squared theta. All right, so that gives us our second identity. Pretty straightforward. And I don't actually memorize this one. I simply re-derive it every time I need to. After you've done it a few times, it becomes really fast. Okay, that leaves us with one more to derive. Again, let's start with sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. And this time, we're going to divide everything by sine squared of theta. All right, just like that, dividing both sides of the equation by sine squared of theta. And that gives us sine squared over sine squared is 1 plus cosine over sine is cotangent. So that's cotangent squared of theta. And 1 over sine squared, we need one that says co, so it's cosecant squared of theta. All right, so that gives us our third identity. All right, so there you go. 1 plus cotangent squared theta equals cosecant squared theta. Let's go ahead and clear the screen. And we'll write all of these one more time in one clean screen. Sine squared of theta plus cosine squared of theta equals 1. That's the first one you need to memorize. It's easy to tell where it came from, but make sure you have that memorized. Next, we divided everything by cosine squared to give us tangent squared theta plus cosine over cosine is 1 equals reciprocal of cosine is secant. All right, then to develop the third one, we just divided everything by sine squared, so that will give us 1. Sine squared over sine squared is 1. Cosine squared over sine squared is cotangent squared. And 1 over cosine squared, 1 over sine squared is cosecant squared. All right, there you go. That's our 3 Pythagorean identities. You need to make sure you have those memorized. Spend some time working on them. Go back through these derivations. Make sure you can do them yourself. And if you can, then you'll probably have these for long term. Remember, we're not just trying to memorize these. We're trying to actually understand where they came from, and so we know how to use them and why we're able to use them.